Hi everybody, it's Sarah, or as you might also know me, the Fluffy Curvy Princess, and today I want to talk about the worst 5 books I read in the year 2024. Now, this whole year was pretty good. If a book wasn't great, it was at least of average ranking most of the time, though there were about 4 fiction books that were in the 2 to 1 star category. There were also a lot of non-fiction books that ended up in that category, but that's because I purposefully look for and read books that I know don't give out good advice. For example, I read Created to Be His Helpmeet by Debbie Pearl, which is probably one of the worst books on marriage advice, as a woman was almost killed by her husband, and Debbie said one of the potential options she could follow is to forgive him and live with him and not tell anyone about the abuse, because God's not going to help her unless she stops complaining about how her husband treats her. Yeah, so really wild stuff like that. Now, these books in my mind are so obviously bad, and I often made an entire separate video for almost all of them, that I'm not going to personally be putting these in my ranking. This ranking is strictly for fun and for fiction books that I think were horrendous. This is also my personal opinion. So if there's a book on here that you love and you think I'm an idiot for hating, you know what? That's fine. Everyone has different taste, and my opinions are not the end-all be-all. With that being said, though, let's get started on our first book today. We will be starting from the best of these books and ending, if number 1, as the worst book of the year. So in 5th place, we have Love Story by Eric Sagel. So I actually bought this gift as a kind of gag gift to myself because my grandmother and I a while ago watched the movie Love Story together, which came out in 1970 and was really popular when she was a teenager. We both hated it, and at the end, we were laughing at just how much we did not like it. It's extremely sappy and over the top. It follows the story of Oliver, who's like this rich preppy boy, and this girl, Jenny, who's from a more poor Italian-American family. It follows their relationship because at the beginning of the book it is revealed that Jenny has died. And it kind of goes back and traces the relationship up to the point when she gets sick and dies, as well as it details a lot about Oliver and the strained relationship he has with his father. Though I hated the movie, and I did still rank this book 2.5 stars, I didn't hate the book. In fact, I found it a lot better than the movie, but I also did put in my original review online that my expectations were really low, so I wasn't disappointed. I think one of the reasons I liked the book more than the movie was because in the movie the lines are delivered in a way that makes the main characters seem a lot less likable, and in the book you don't have that same tone. And in the book they just seemed a lot less obnoxious in their tone. The reason this book isn't rated very high, though, despite that, is because it's still the same sappy story. Jenny and Oliver are from opposite worlds, but they fall in love anyway, even though Oliver's family probably doesn't approve, and Oliver just hates his father because his father could never understand him and what he wants to do. And there's just pointless drama, and just, it's not very interesting. It's just cheesy. I also hate Oliver with a passion. He is a selfish, entitled, spoiled brat. He's just so annoying, and like when people talk about a privileged guy, this is what they're talking about. Like, he is constantly complaining about his family and like, my father expects me to do well in school and to get good grades, and he's just this and that, and like swears when talking about his dad, even though his dad in the entire book, in my opinion, does not do anything wrong. He literally just exists, if I remember correctly, and Oliver hates him for that. He hates him for existing and being rich. And I'm like, I don't know how more entitled you can get. And Jenny is also done with his garbage because she's like, you need to treat your dad better. And thankfully by the end of the book things have kind of resolved in that way. But like, Oliver's just so insufferable as a human being throughout this entire book that like, it kind of takes away from enjoyment. And then besides that, like I said, the plot itself is just really corny and cheesy. In 4th place, we have Ithaca by Claire North. I read this way back in the beginning of this year in January, February, and it follows the story of the Odyssey from Penelope's perspective, or the wife of Odysseus. And it talks about her time on the island. This is a trilogy, and I actually just finished the 2nd book, which was pretty decent. But this book unfortunately hit the worst of the year because it committed the insufferable sin of being dull. I kind of don't even remember most of the plot, except for that Penelope, as in the original tale, is being pursued by various suitors that she does not want to marry, though in the book, it's not just because she's so loyal to her husband, as much as she knows if she picks someone, it's going to upset things politically as well. And while there is lovely prose, the characters' plot and pacing were just boring. And there was this overly modern feminist millennial tone, and I'm not against feminism whatsoever, but I just found the way the author did this was really annoying and juvenile. I mean, at one point, The narrator literally says Penelope can't talk about trade because it would be the same as her talking about menstruation. What? I can't take that seriously. No one in any time period, I'm sure, including ancient Greece, would think talking about trading animals is on the same level as talking about menstruation. Like, it was just kind of insulting. And while there were good points to the story, that modernization took away from it a lot. Even without that, though, as I said earlier, it's just not that interesting to read about. From what I remember of the plot, the story is told from the perspective of Hera, who's the Greek goddess of the home. And she is talking about Penelope as she's, as I said earlier, avoiding all these suitors, as well as how Penelope sustains the island through trade. Meanwhile, Clytemnestra, her cousin, comes to her seeking for aid because her son wants to kill her, which is in the original Greek myth. And Penelope hides her away, and it just goes into like the court intrigue and politics, and I love court intrigue, so you would think this kind of thing would be right up my alley. But again, the delivery is just so boring that I don't even remember a lot of what happened in this story. And it just felt kind of preachy of, man, women in the ancient world suffered so much and modern feminism is better. And I'm not saying that that's not true, but there's a way to do it and a way to not do it, and this is not the way to do it. I'll just say the second book is a lot more interesting. I almost didn't read the second book because this one was just not that great. But if you've already suffered through the first one, I think you'll like the second one. It tones down the modernistic feminism somewhat and has just a better story. Next up, in third place, we have Cake Eater by Alison Delenn. Now we are getting into the books that were just plain awful. Cake Eater was a train wreck, a disaster. I picked up this book because it was about Marie Antoinette, who I love reading about. She is, that problematic, glamorous icon that we all know. Anyway, so this was supposed to be a retelling of that, but set in a futuristic dystopia. And I understand what the author is trying to do, but the delivery was just atrocious. It had a lot of flaws, not of the least which was the book's overflowing poor little rich girl themes. From characterization that gave no responsibility to the main characters, to a sloppy translation from past to future, to cringe dialogue, this whole book was just brimming with issues. There are very few things I actually liked about the book. I mean, I think I remember liking the relationship between Prince Louis and Marie at some points. It was cute. And I liked how their relationship developed slowly over time. And I also liked how it was able to portray social media can get out of hand and how things can be twisted and misconstrued to lead people on, so that way the mass will form opinions that might not be accurate. So that was okay. But for the more complex themes in the book, it just really fumbled the ball. Like, one of the things is it talks a lot about history repeating itself, but it does this by having Marie Antoinette in the future have the exact same in life as Marie Antoinette in the past, and it's not because she's living in a simulation or because her life was planned that way like I thought. It's identical. And I just think, okay, when we say history is repeating itself, we don't really mean that. We're meaning that similar events and errors are committed, not that people are living identical lives with identical names and identical hobbies. Those, no. And then, like I said earlier, it just makes Marie Antoinette and Prince or King Louis seem so incompetent and so not at all responsible for what goes wrong in the kingdom. I'm not going to be one of those people who say they deserve the fate that they got or say that they were evil. But to act like they were just super naive children when they were reigning who knew nothing at all and everyone else around them were the real bad guys, I just feel like that's inaccurate. And maybe they were trying to make the characters more likable, but I feel like you can make Marie Antoinette likable while still making her and her husband pretty incompetent rulers who brought about their own destruction. I feel like it's this balance, because I've read other books about Marie Antoinette and that's been accomplished. Anyway, I'm just disappointed because unlike the next two books, I can't say it's so bad, it's good. It's just this lukewarm, not very good book. I actually considered ranking this one last because I actually kind of enjoy the next two books because they're so terrible, but I feel like on an objective level, this book is technically better than these next two, so I ranked it as third. Book number 2 is The Cellar by Natasha Preston. This was on my TBR for years. It's here, the original OG Wattpad book, and I'm not using that as just a descriptor. Yes, this book was originally published, if you want to call it that, on Wattpad before being picked up by an official publisher. And I heard about it as a teenager, and this was such a big deal. It was the dream. Everybody wanted this. at least on the Wattpad community. Someone published a story online, got it published. Teen Me thought that was the coolest thing ever, and I'm also a huge fan of kidnapping stories, so that's another reason Teen Me was curious. I skimmed through it several years ago, but I've never actually read it. So this last April, I decided to buy it since it was cheap and give it a go. And let me say, it sucked. This was basically a Lifetime movie. And you know what? That's okay, because I like Lifetime movies. They are terrible in every way possible, which makes them bad thrillers, but amazing comedies. The plot is really basic. It's basically a man just kidnaps a teenage girl and stores him in his basement. The characters are about as flat as saltine crackers. Summer is kidnapped by a man who calls himself Clover and has these other women in his basement whom he has all named after flowers. While Summer is moaning away her kidnapping, her boyfriend Lewis is looking for her. And I just have to say, one of the reasons this book is rated so low is because everyone in this book, I'm convinced, had a rock in their head where their brain was supposed to be. Summer's pretty bad, but I can excuse it because she's a moody teenager who's been abducted. She's probably not in her right mind. Even so, I didn't like her character. She's one of those super quirky girls who's not like other girls because I eat my pizza differently. And I know that sounds, again, like an exaggeration, but that literally is like something that's discussed in the book. She also thinks she's hideous, but everybody else around her is like, you have like goddess level beauty. So it's a Twilight all over again. Lewis, though, her boyfriend, is by far the worst character in the book. I don't care what you say about the antagonist, Clover. Lewis was the real antagonist because his entire character arc was antagonizing me. He was more of an emotional wreck than Summer ever was, despite not being kidnapped, and I don't think there's even a rock in that skull. There's nothing up there. There's just an empty space in his head. There isn't even a rock. His search for Summer and the logic behind it is so idiotic that I was actually at times actively rooting for him to get arrested. As for the actual antagonist Clover, his character felt like a character AI impression of a psychopath. I also like to think of him as a dollar store Norman Bates because he also has a lot of mommy issues but is a lot less interesting. The other characters in this book really aren't worth mentioning except for another girl who's kidnapped called Rose, who actually could have been interesting if they had explored her character more. But because she's one of those characters who's in the basement and she's been there so long, she just kind of is accepting her fate and is even helping her perpetrator. But let's not kid ourselves. It would have taken a miracle to save this thing. Also, another huge complaint I have about this book is Natasha Preston. Fire! Editor! What were you paying them for? Did you even have one? You used the same 3 phrases in this book so many times that I would have died from alcohol poisoning if I took a shot every time you wrote, she rolled her eyes, she stuck up her nose, or he stuck up his nose, or he's insane, he's a psycho, he's a freak. She constantly repeats similar words and phrases. Besides this, there were at least 7 noticeable grammar and/or spelling errors, and this was only after I started counting halfway through the book, because I had seen so many, I was like, I need to start keeping track of these things. There are constant plot contradictions. For example, at one point, a girl's going to hit a man in the head of a vase, but then she hits him in the head of a frying pan. Later in the book, Summer says that it took the girls 10 minutes to clean up after someone was murdered, but a few sentences later it says it took them a half hour. There's a lot more, but I don't have them all listed here. I don't think we need to waste any more time talking about them. I just think it was really amateur, even for a Wattpad book. I expected better. The only redeeming quality about this thing was the unintentional comedy it provided. So if you like a good hate read and a laugh, I absolutely recommend it. Other than that, do not torture yourself by reading this book. It would be worse than being kidnapped and being named after a flower. And then finally, the one we've all been waiting for, and number 1 place is Gothikana by Runix. In my personal opinion, this is the worst book of the year. The crowning jewel in my list of bad books. It's the kind of bad where I was laughing out loud every few pages, and my jaw was literally dropped in bafflement at the ones I wasn't laughing at. I made a whole video about this, and it was actually probably my favorite video of the year to make. It's just such an unhinged book, and it was fun to talk about. It reminded me of Riverdale Season 3, when they were trying so hard to be edgy and dark academia and were just not being that. It follows a young girl named Corvina going to this really exclusive, mysterious college, and she ends up starting an affair with her creepy teacher. Except the plot is to try to convince us that her teacher is not a groomer and a creep, but actually he's just really misunderstood. And he's a bad boy. He comes off, though, to me as a total perv, and it doesn't help by the fact that the author was writing constant smut scenes in this book, and they aren't even well written. They're like the worst romantic scenes I've ever read in a book. Not that I'm reading it for that, okay? But if I'm gonna be forced to sit through your probably cringe steamy scene, you could at least write it well. I saw in my notes that I was reading earlier, it says, the smut scares me. No hi, hello, how are you? Just 0 to 100. As for the plot, there's a student who goes missing every year at this mysterious black ball. And we need to find out who's behind it, and there are all these mysterious events that are happening at the school, and I feel like it's not even really worth going over because none of these questions are answered hardly at all. This book is literally the definition of thanks girl, you gave us literally nothing. There is, in the edition I had, a special add-on chapter, at least I'm pretty sure it's an add-on chapter, that kind of hints at things, but it's so obviously shoehorned in there, and it feels like it was only done that because people were complaining about the ending. And it still doesn't explain anything and feels even more sloppy because she didn't hint about it throughout the book. It's obviously just like tagged on at the end to try to save this thing. On a fun side, though, I was imagining the main characters as Sweeney Todd, and on the bright side, though, I was imagining Johnny Depp and Jenna Ortega as Sweeney Todd and Wednesday Addams for the teacher and his student. This book, though, like, it was funny, I'm not gonna lie, it was pretty goofy at times, and I don't think it has as many grammar errors as The Cellar, but The Cellar is inherently a lot less problematic and it's a lot more fun. This one just felt kind of icky with the way it portrayed the teacher-student romance, and at least in The Cellar, everything is pretty much concluded at the end. Nothing is really concluded except for the fact that Corvina and her professor are getting married and going to have kids together. So these were the 5 worst books that I read in 2024. What about you? What are some pretty bad books you read in 2024? I'd love to hear about it. I always love me a good hate read, so maybe I'll take some of them as recommendations for next year. As always, thank you so much for checking out my channel and hope to see you again soon. Make sure to like, comment, and subscribe. Bye.